So you want to use PEX to run your compressed air for your shop. You cheapskate. How dare you? Anyways, in this video we're going to talk about what I did and some tips, as well as the cost differences and the pros and cons of doing this. I am running this PEX air line in my personal shop here that is 50 by 80. The tried and true way of running air line in a shop is galvanized pipe here. So there's lots of pros to galvanized pipe. It has a long lifespan, it is very strong, but the downside is it is not very flexible and it is very expensive. Now it can vary greatly by the amount of links that you're buying the galvanized pipe in, but say, for example, a 10-foot stick will cost you around $40. So a 10-foot stick is kind of a pretty basic length that you'll likely have to purchase a lot of, so you can count on that being a pretty good estimator of your cost, about $4 a foot. Now PEX, on the other hand, this is Sharkbite brand, 1 inch. At the high end, about $1 a foot. This particular roll that I bought ended up costing about 80 cents a foot. Galvanized is superior in strength, but a lot of people don't know that galvanized pipe does still rust and the interior can still flake off and downstream in your compressed air system. I know this for a fact because I work in a big commercial shop that has very high air usage, and we get quite regularly things clogging up our guns. PEX, on the other hand, while not recommended by the manufacturer to be used as compressed air line, is extremely convenient. You can see a bend here that would be quite difficult in galvanized. So that shows you that if you were to go with galvanized, you would end up buying more square feet to go the same distance, just because you can't take nice whoop-de bends like that. Now, what are the downsides of using PEX? Well, by the manufacturer, it's not rated for compressed air. That's something to keep in mind. Another issue is it does not do good with UV exposure. In my personal shop here, all of this will end up getting covered up with steel siding, same as what's on the roof here. So my concern about the UV exposure is non-existent. Another downside of PEX is it does not do well with high heat situations. For example, here is our AC compressor converted to compressor project here. You can see this nylon plastic airline deal melted right at the compressor discharge due to heat. While it's not PEX, I think PEX would suffer the same issue. We need the air coming out of our compressor to be cooler before it hits the actual PEX run. We're here in the lean-to that is right next to the big shop here. And this is where my air compressor will be for reducing noise purposes. So my air compressor will be installed in here somewhere. This will be the start of the air compressor piped into this galvanized pipe. Just remember that galvanized handles the heat way better. I have a 20-foot run from there to the main shop where it enters. And inside the shop, I have another 10 feet this way and 10 feet that way. So that gives the air coming out of the compressor about 30 feet to cool down before it actually hits a PEX line. And I'd highly recommend that just to help keep from degrading that PEX. Something to think about, and this applies to all shop air system runs, is it's best to have a simple water trap system installed. Now, I mentioned I work in a commercial shop, and you do hear a lot about these fancy air dryers and whatnot, and in some applications that might be worth it. In a mechanical shop, anything that requires extra cost, maintenance, and reduces reliability ends up getting shoved out the window. So you're better off having a simple water trap, and say if you have a paint booth or a plasma cutter or something, it would be better to run air dryer or air conditioning system off of just one leg of the compressed air. So you're not conditioning all of the air running through the shop, only the 1 or 2 legs that are for the specialized equipment that you have. So my simple water trap is, if you look at this, we're run at an angle to help all the water that condensates in this line to drain back down to this corner tee here. Let's get a closer look at that. And there it goes out the building. Here we are back in the lean-to. This line also has a slight grade down to this point where we have our water trap. That's just a fancy term. We got a leg down here for the water to condensate and run down into here, and then a simple valve that we can then drain the water that collects. Eventually I'll run a PEX tube just to the outside of the building, so I don't have water draining in here. Now this is a good low cost, low maintenance way of getting some of that bulk water out of your air system. I did mention how much more flexible PEX is in installation. Now you can bend galvanized pipe like I did here. It just takes some effort and time. Now in the shop here, you may have noticed that I used 3/4 inch galvanized pipe that is before my then 1 inch PEX run. Now this is 1 inch PEX B, by the way. You may think, well, that's stupid. Isn't that a restriction? And that's a good question. Let me show you why I did that. We have here some 3/4 galvanized MPT pipe. Now let's measure the inside diameter. And it measures out at 0.83 inches. Now let's measure the inside diameter of our PEX B fittings. Now we're measuring the fitting and not the line, because in PEX the fittings are the restriction, unlike in galvanized MPT pipe where the fittings are actually bigger than the pipe. So that's not restricting us there, other than this one being an elbow. And you can see here how the fitting actually goes inside of the PEX. So the inside of this PEX brass fitting measures out at 0.72. So that's safe to say that 3/4 inch pipe before our PEX run of 1 inch line is very appropriate. Now you may think running 1 inch PEX line seems pretty extreme. Well, the main reason I went with a 1 inch PEX run is because I had a whole gob of it left over from running my well line. But I think 3/4 inch PEX would probably be okay for most applications. On PEX B, you install the connectors into the hose, and then using a crimping tool, you actually smash, or rather crimp, these stainless steel connectors to then hold the line in place. Now you may be a little bit tempted to buy the sharkbite quick connector type PEX fittings, but there's some downsides to those. They're pretty dang pricey, but you don't need a crimp tool, which is nice, and it speeds up the installation process. But I've learned from the air brake world that quick connect fittings tend to have a short life. So that's not something I'm interested in inside of a wall cavity where I can't access and repair the line very easily. So I would probably stick with the crimp style fittings. Now, why did I choose PEX B over PEX A? I wouldn't consider PEX B to be any better necessarily, but PEX B crimp fittings are so much faster and easier. Let's look at some of these connections. Here's my transition from the galvanized to the PEX. I have all these capped off because I was pressurizing and spraying for leaks, which amazingly I had no leaks. So how I did this is I just drilled a hole through my purlins here and ran a T-type connection and held it in place with plumber's tape. This is what I'm calling plumber's tape. And I used plumber's tape for most of the mounting locations. Now I did use some of these fancy plastic holders in some locations, Now these are fine. The advantage of this is that it doesn't rub the line long term, where possibly using plumber's tape, when I'm an old man, that line might rub through and spring a leak, but that's for old man Tinker to worry about. These tees made it quite easy to continue on my run. Have air on every side of the bays. Now I'm going to set this up for hose reels as well as for large tire gun air hoses, so the big connectors. Using PEX makes it easy to just slap in a T like this and go off a different direction. Very simple, very fast. Now fittings you see like this cost roughly $6, so they're not super cheap. Now let's go up into the ceiling and I'll show you what I did up there. So when you run into complications with your routing going through the walls, in my instance, I could not route around the garage doors through the wall header, or through the header, because I didn't have room. So I had to come up into the ceiling. So I have the main line that comes down through here, and I have a 90 that goes down to one air supply. And on down here, I have a T for the air supply that then runs to the space between the garage doors. So that worked out quite nicely. Now something to think about when you're running your PEX runs is you want to do your best to avoid 90s like this. Now I couldn't avoid the 90 in this location, but I remember in air brake class that having a 90 is the equivalent of extending the hose run several feet. I don't recall exactly the amount of feet, but that reduces your volume to whatever location. Look at this bad boy. Now this is obviously not the compressor that I will be installing to run this whole shop system. I just plumbed this little guy in to make sure I didn't have any leaks. And this may be a step that you're tempted to skip, but I would like you to just think for a minute about all the amount of work it would take to then pull wall panels off if you did have a leak and then have to find and repair your airline leak. Well, I hope you found this video educational or entertaining, and I hope I shed some light on some of the pros and cons of PEX and maybe galvanized as well. Now I am extremely happy with my choice for the PEX, because if I had to front the costs to run galvanized to the 8 locations that I have air, I probably ended up reducing the amount of locations by at least half, just because I couldn't afford it. If you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing and maybe watching another video.